noon.
Okay, all right, it's noon. Good morning, distinguished leaders. On behalf of the San Diego Black American Political Association, we want to thank you for agreeing to serve on the panel and share your expertise regarding this important topic, is democracy at stake? I'm going to ask all that are on Zoom at this point to turn your mic off, please. All right, our format for today is that we will be, first of all, I will be welcoming you. We'll have a land acknowledgement and a moment of silence for Sandra Massey, who was shot and killed by a deputy sheriff. So I'm here again to welcome you, and also wanted to go into the land acknowledgement. We stand upon a land that carries the footsteps of millennia of Kumeyaay people, excuse me, are a people whose traditional lifeways intertwine with a worldview of earth and sky in a community of living beings. This land is a part of a relationship that has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced the Kumeyaay people to the present day. It is part of a worldview founded in the harmony of the cycles of the sky and balance in forces of life. A Southern Community College, we acknowledge the legacy from the Kumeyaay people. We promote this balance in life as we pursue our goals of knowledge, understanding. We find inspiration in the Kumeyaay spirit to open our minds and hearts. It is the land of the Kumeyaay. E.J. Ihan, my heart is good. Let's take a moment of silence for Ms. Sandra Massey, a Sangamon County Sheriff Deputy, shot and killed a 36-year-old Black woman, Sandra Massey, as she called for help. A moment of silence. We want to welcome all of you, even our webinar guests, to our discussion today. I would also like to introduce you to some of our BAPAC, Black American Political Association board members. We have Eric Herford on the Zoom call, and I believe we have Pearlie Blackman on the Zoom call. Other board members are Kim Nsamaji and Marquita Brown. Thank you for being here, wonderful board members. A few housekeeping matters. The Zoom call will consist of our panelists and our moderator. And once I introduce the moderator and the panelists, our moderator for today, Cheryl Athea Phelps, will then take that role. If you have questions, please send them in the chat. If we have time at the end, of course, we will take those questions. If not, send them to our BAPAC SD website, and we will send the questions to the panelists, and we will get answers to you. Or you could always email me at ellendnash@gmail.com. Let me now introduce our moderator for the afternoon, Miss Cheryl Athea Phelps. Cheryl was born and raised in San Diego. Cheryl Alethea Phelps is deeply committed to dismantling systems that perpetuate injustice, isolation, and powerlessness. This passion and more than 3 decades of experience in nonprofit, philanthropic, legislative, and campaign environments inform her work as Chief Communication Officer for the ACLU of San Diego and Imperial Counties. She has a lengthy resume, but I wanted to highlight a few things about Cheryl because she's an amazing young lady. She was previously employed at the San Diego Foundation, where her efforts achieved notable innovation in the use of digital media to enhance news literacy and inspire San Diegans to share their own stories. She served for 5 years with the Subcommittee on Legislation and National Security, where her oversight work led to the Republic of South Africa during the 1994 elections that resulted in Nelson Mandela's presidency. She also served 2 years in the minority, where her responsibilities included overseeing the performance of departments of education, labor, HHS, HUD, and Veterans Affairs. Cheryl has volunteered for numerous local, state, national, and international organizations. In recent years, she's enjoyed moderating popular candidate forums convened by the nonpartisan Black American Political Association of San Diego. I wanted to share a personal experience about Cheryl. Earlier this week, Cheryl invited me to hear her Changing the Narrative Summit, where communication experts delved into narrative changes and practices that can influence and inform policies and our mindset. Cheryl is always pushing us to higher level thinking and solutions. I give you to you and introduce Cheryl Alethea Phelps. Also want to introduce you to Rick Epps, one of our panelists, is a retired San Diego State professor of political science and public administration. He is currently a professor of political science and global studies at the Imperial Valley campus, where he is also president of the IVC Academic Senate. Additionally, he is a political analyst and consultant to multiple TV news, radio, and social media experts. He earned his undergraduate and graduate degrees from the University of California, where he also played football. In addition to his general background in political science, he's a respected authority on Middle East politics, American government, international relations, and I could go on and on. He has also taught at multiple colleges and universities, including UCLA, UCSD, San Diego State University, University of Oxford, Southwestern College, and Grossmont College. Following his honorable discharge from the United States, Professor Epps worked for multiple military contractors working in engineering, operations research, and program management. I bring to you, as a panelist, Professor Rick Epps. Also want to introduce you to another panelist, our own brother Shabazz, hails from Eaglewood, California. He is a Malcolm X-ite and a former Marine. Currently, he serves as an assistant professor of African American Studies at Southwestern College. Above all, Brother Shabazz is dedicated to serving people. Our other panelist is our own attorney, Janane McIntyre. She's the founder and managing member of the McIntyre Law Group. Ms. McIntyre has over 25 years of experience helping organizations providing solutions from a legal and human resources perspective. Informed by her Juris Doctoral degree, licensed in California and Michigan, she has an extensive professional background representing both public and prior agencies. Attorney McIntyre also served as the city attorney in Michigan. She is a member of the Earl B. Gilliam Bar Association and a member of BAPAC. She's a proud mother of 2 adult sons and an avid traveler. Our last and final panelist is Dennis Dawson, attorney of law. A longtime resident of San Diego, graduated from Howard University School of Law. Dennis served as Deputy Attorney General of the California Attorney General for 34 years and 8 months. Dennis has served in many different capacities, including president of the Earl B. Gilliam Bar Association, where he worked with the late Judge Daniel Weber, the late husband of Secretary of State Shirley Weber, to establish and form the Earl B. Gilliam Bar Association. BAPAC has partnered with Dennis on several civil rights and social justice issues over the years. He is retired and enjoys spending time with his grandchildren, playing tennis, and he is a musician. I introduce you to our panel, and now I will turn it over to our most capable moderator for the afternoon, none other than Cheryl Alethea Phelps. Take it away, Cheryl.
Thank you. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, BayPAC San Diego C4 Board. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cheryl Alethea Phelps. I use she, her pronouns. It's my great privilege to once again serve as moderator of a BayPAC San Diego Education Forum. And like Simone Biles and every one of us, I love my Black job. This one in particular. So the purpose of this nonpartisan convening is to give all people, particularly Black voters in our region, the opportunity to develop a deeper understanding of our political landscape and leaders by examining them through the lens of Black experience, aspiration, culture, and community. This is a C4 convening, as Ellen said, although we are nonpartisan as an organization, we do have opinions and political opinions and can freely express them. I want to join Ellen in sending a warm welcome to our panelists, Dennis Dawson, Rick Epps, Janine McIntyre, and Brother Shabazz. We were given 3 questions by Ellen. You know, I will tell you, Ellen knows this. In my mind, you're always going to be TFEN. For those of us who knows what that stands for, I'm very proud to be a part of your power leveraging efforts. So, Ellen provided us 3 questions. What do we mean by democracy, historically and specifically? Is democracy at risk, and why should this matter to Black San Diegans? What does it benefit us to defend democracy? And then if democracy is at risk, and if this matters to Black San Diegans, what actions can we, should we, must we take to protect it? So very quickly, we're gonna do a round of yes, no, I don't know, or have no opinion, or if you have a different opinion, an opportunity to state it quickly. I'll ask each of the panelists in alphabetical order. Yes, no, I don't know, or if you have a different opinion, feel free to state it. Is democracy at stake? Attorney Dennis Dawson.
Absolutely.
Professor Rick Epps. Oh, I'm sorry. Before we go on to Professor Epps, did you want to expand on that, Dennis?
Yes, did you want us just to answer yes or no, or did you want us to expand on the answer that we gave?
If it's not yes, I'm going to circle back and ask you to respond. So since you said yes, I've got other questions for you. So, but let's go on to the next one, and I'll circle back to each of you. Professor Epps, is democracy at stake? Yes, no, I don't know. Or have a different opinion. Perhaps you're not on, your mic is muted. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. The answer is yes. It is definitely at stake.
Janine McIntyre, Attorney Janine.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Brother Shabazz. Give you a moment to turn on your mic, if you will. Is democracy?
My thingy was messed up. No, we do not. We're not at democracy is not at risk.
Why do you say that, sir?
In my view, we don't have a democracy. Black folks were still being killed for voting in the late 60s, and what's evolved after that doesn't resemble equal access to all Americans. So Black people are still subjugated. Therefore, if one subset doesn't have democracy, then we can't say we're a democratic nation. So it's something we're still striving for, I would say.
So you're saying democracy is not at stake because democracy does not exist in this country?
Right, for Black folks.
Got you. Anyone want to respond to that before we jump into, and I will give a definition, Wikipedia definition of democracy. Does anyone want to respond to Brother Shabazz's comment? That not at risk because it doesn't exist for Black people in this country?
Well, if I may.
Please.
Yes, I respect Brother for his position. So I would say, as we know democracy, as we advance in getting closer to a perfected democracy, it is at risk. Is there still some work to be done to establish this government and its lived experience by all, namely Black people? No, there's much work to be done. But as we know, democracy today is that advancement, is that growth, the tireless work that many have come before us and plowed through, is that at risk? I say absolutely yes.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to give a brief response, or shall I move on to the definition?
I'd like to say that democracy, in my view, is at risk, even though we as African Americans have had a stony road to try. We at least have secured the right to vote. We are United States citizens. And as long as any one of us is over 18 years of age, and we are not in prison serving a commitment for a existing felony, and we are not declared mentally incompetent, we have the right to influence who our leaders are by voting. And I think the threat to the voting rights that we all have read about and have seen in the media is putting those voting rights at risk. When you're in Georgia and you're standing in a long line in the poll in the sweltering sun, and state law says it's illegal for someone to give you a bottle of water. That's just one example. And then all of the gerrymandering that we see in districts, especially where there are large Black populations, we have to make sure that we fight against those efforts to curtail our voting rights. Now, brother, it is not perfect, but we at least have the opportunity to participate in democracy by voting.
Thank you for that, Dennis. What I'm going to do now is sort of frame what we're talking about, so we all.
Can I ask a quick question?
You're going to get a chance.
Okay.
You're going to get a chance. I do want to keep us moving, and I want to give context to everyone, so we're talking about the same thing. And then I would like you to respond. And I should say that I intend to moderate this as a discussion rather than a debate. So everyone's going to have an opportunity to express their view, I hope. So what do we mean by democracy? So the word's Greek. It comes from a combination of two words, demos, which means common, the people, and kratos, which means force. So the will of the people, the force of the people. And at its core, a democracy is a system of governance that ensures every citizen has a voice and every citizen has a responsibility for shaping the society in which they live. What's been interesting in the US is how we've defined citizen, and that has evolved over time. So the US Constitution establishes the United States as a federal democratic republic. Federal because we are a union of sovereign states. Democratic because people just govern themselves. And then republic, we do this by by the representatives whom we elect, and we run ourselves according to a constitution. So our form of governance, the US form of governance, is a representative version of democracy, and is constrained by a constitution which imposes limits on the power of government. And, you know, from our preamble, it starts, we the people, but it also talks about what we need to do to form a more perfect union. So there was an acknowledgement that the union is imperfect and that the Constitution, this foundational document, is imperfect itself. And why that is critical for us as Black people is when the Constitution was signed in 1787, only white men with property were recognized as citizens with the right to vote. And the document has been amended over time to expand voting protections to Black men. This was the 15th Amendment following the Civil War. to women, the 19th Amendment, to end the poll tax, because as Brother Shabazz mentioned, the environment has been hostile to Black people in our efforts to exercise democracy since the inception of this country. And then lowering the voting age to 18 in 1971. But a democracy, for all intents and purposes, is the right to vote in regular, free, and fair elections. And there's a lot of things that come from that. We're going to dig into those a little bit deeper. But we did have a Voting Rights Act of 1965, and that was because that these laws, the Constitution, has not been something that all states and municipalities have observed, and that has impacted people of color and Black people specifically in terrible ways. So I do want to invite you to respond now to Dennis's comments, Brother Shabazz, and then we'll spend a little bit more time on the debate, the discussion whether or not this is a democracy worth defending.
Oh, right. Brother Attorney Dennis, just a question. So you would agree then that, right, if the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965, and Black people being killed for voting in the 60s, then democracy hasn't existed for most of US history for Black folk, right? So democracy starts when we have the right to vote, right? So then you're saying that democracy begins in 1965. We have roughly 15 million Black folks who were alive in 1965 out of the 45 million, whatever it is, right? Are you saying then, or do you agree that democracy only began then in 1965 forward? I just wanted to get some clarity on that position you have.
My response is that you are absolutely correct. We only received federal protection in 1965 after many, many efforts to obtain protection to the right to vote. But the reason that I answered the question the way I did is because the question was framed is whether democracy is at risk now.
Got you. And I respect your answer, and I just would contest the idea that something significant has happened post 1965. I don't think that's democracy. It's on paper certainly, but in practice, there's something else going on.
What else is going on, Brother Shabazz?
Well, mass incarceration, for example. Political prisoners. We have, for example, Rucho McGee, who spent 65 years in prison, right? And his crime was actually, his politics was his crime. And we were active in LA with the liberation of Geronimo Pratt, who was in prison for his politics. He was the Minister of Defense for the Black Panther Party LA chapter. He was in prison for 27 years for his crime was his politics. And so we have maybe, I don't know how many now, maybe 30 or 40 or so who are sort of formally defined as political prisoners. But if you're being locked up for your politics, right, and locked up, and the government's conspiring to lock you up, and government's conspiring to kill Black leaders like Fred Hampton and Malcolm X and even Dr. King, that says to me there's something else going besides democracy.
Thank you. Let me jump to Professor Rick Epps, excuse me. One of the things that we say when we talk about democracies is that the role of a democracy, in addition to protecting the one person, one vote model, is that a democracy safeguards all other civil rights and freedoms. So for example, in the Constitution Bill of Rights, there is freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and the free press, right to free press, are all protected. This to ensure that people can contribute to the public discourse without fear of reprisal, and that people can dissent without fear of reprisal. So can you talk a little bit, Professor Rick, about how our society ensures that our democracy, if you will, ensures those protections to Black people and where we are falling short? And we'll talk about on the other side what we can do to improve. But can you pinpoint some other ways in which we fall short?
Well, this is really, it's an interesting question because there are many dynamics that have fallen under the Bill of Rights. And I've always, when I tell my students, I said, the Bill of Rights is a subject to interpretation because, for example, individuals can interpret it and say, well, I have a right to peacefully protest. I have the right to, under the criminal elements of certain things that our citizens are protected by, because those Bill of Rights were built to fortify the democracy. They were built they were the protection for the citizens against the government in case the government decided to come after them. The problem is that the citizens don't have the power. So the policeman with the gun, or those who are in government who have the power, interpret the law a different way than you interpret it. Who wins, right? And normally the individual citizen does not win in that scenario. So it's basically, while on paper, and I thought this is really interesting, because on paper, all these things look good, right? When you look at all the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and all the Civil War amendments, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, all those things are all built to define and to give us, say on paper, what we're allowed to do. But in practice, they don't exist, right? If you think about, in fact, if you go back to the WTO in November 1999, the WTO was up in Seattle, Washington. The folks came out to protest, started off peaceful protests. They were like, whose cops? Our cops. They were in, peacefully protesting, and the cops took off and beat them down and beat them senseless. And people who had idealistically sort of looked at democracy and looked at their rights that they had as citizens of this country, and were slapped in the face to realize that their freedom begins and ends when somebody else tells them it begins and ends. That we like the idea, and I guess I'm saying this in the context that we like the idea of what these things propose, but in practice, they don't really exist for a lot of folks. And that goes into a broader discussion, which we can have later, about the economics and other aspects that unwind some of these things. But again, I like when I tell my students, or even my Black students, and I'll say, look, just because you think, or my son, when I talk to him and I'll say, hey, you're a young Black man. If you get, he's a big kid. I'm like, if you get stopped by the police, you have to understand that just because you think you have certain rights, you don't fool yourself into thinking that what you think is right is the same as what they think is right. And I think it's an important element that we have to be able to, and that's why we're having this discussion, is, the reality of democracy, and is it a democracy for all? And that's where the struggle comes in. And I think that, again, that's part of this broader conversation that we're having today. So
let me do a quick yes or no around the panel. We heard the definition of democracy. We've just heard some compelling reasons why Black people are not finding home in that space. Yes, no, different opinion. Is democracy, the experience of democracy, different for Black people because of race? Is it different because of economics? Or is it no different at all, and everyone is experiencing some tensions around democracy? We'll go in reverse order. Last time we started with Dennis. This time we'll start with Brother Shabazz. Are Black people having a uniquely different experience with democracy, or is this something that's happening more broadly, and certain people everyone is having some tension?
Yeah, I would concur with Professor Rick. Basically, there's something on paper that says democracy, and we talk about democracy rhetorically, but the reality for a huge swath of Black folks is we've never seen democracy. And I'm not confident that we can get to that thing in the current structure, because I believe that this system requires our subjugation as Black people. It can't allow Black people to be free, because that will be a different project, right? And
that's
so
not democracy, is what you're saying. It's called something else.
Right. The reason that we're in the condition that we're in, so Black folks have consistently been rock bottom by virtually every quality of life indicator, despite carrying the Democratic Party on our back since the 60s. Right. So I'm suggesting that we can't do democracy in the system, because the system has always required either Black people be enslaved or be second-class citizens. It's literally baked into the American project, and so we can't.
So I want to ask you a question. I'm getting out of my format, but Are you talking about the problem with democracy or a problem with capitalism?
Both, but I'm
Are they
I'm
but
talking
are
about
they the same
democracy
thing?
right now.
Yeah,
where
but I'm
why
wondering if what you're describing is a problem with democracy.
it would also apply to capitalism, but it certainly applies to democracy also. If Black
Thank
folks aren't enjoying democracy, if we say democracy, but we have mass incarceration, if we say we have democracy and Fred Hampton is killed in his bed, right? And I'm saying that's not democracy.
Thank you.
How did the FBI
I got you.
how does the
I got you,
FBI
but we
and the
got to
police
move on
department
because I want to get other people's voices in this, and we're going to come back.
Got
Janine, yes, no? I don't know, different opinion. Are Black people uniquely at risk? Is this a unique situation where how Black people are experiencing democracy in this country? Or are other groups also having tension around democracy? Did we lose Janine?
Okay,
Dennis, while we're trying to
there you
get,
go.
she here?
You're muted.
Thank you. I can't see you on the screen. Janine, if you would unmute, mute. We will come back to Janine. Dennis, what's your thoughts on this issue, this question? Are we unique in how we're experiencing this tension?
Democracy is supposed to be the same for all citizens. The reality is that it is not the same for African Americans. And it hasn't been for centuries. I think that, yes, we are treated differently in this so-called democracy because of our race. And yes, we are treated differently in this democracy because of our economic status, which is a direct result in many cases of our race.
Or how we were treated because of our race? Because our race didn't create the situation.
The race is creating the situation, and one of my concerns about, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I know we're going to talk about 2025. But the first thing that really raised my eyebrows about 2025, and I say this as a attorney who has experience in employment discrimination cases, that this project would take away the ability of attorneys who represent employment discrimination clients from advocating that, yes, they were discriminated against based on disparate impact. Under this 2025, this is how we're treated differently. Now, under that 2025 proposal, we would have to revert to being able to prove intentional racial discrimination. And how can you do that? You generally, and I tell this when I talk to clients, one of my first questions is, do you have a smoking gun? What do you mean? Were you called the N-word? Were you subjected to open and hostile treatment because you were Black and it was spoken and described that way? And the answer is almost never yes. So this taking away under this planned so-called democracy, which is really under 2025 totalitarianism or fascism, this would take a valuable tool away from us who practice in employment discrimination, since we couldn't prove that circumstantial evidence exists to show that this Black employee or Black independent contractor was treated differently because of his or her race.
Thank you. Appreciate your expounding on that. And as you mentioned, we're going to spend quite a bit of time on 2025 to unpack some of its weirder elements. Janine, do we have you with us now? Okay, we're going to move on, and I hope that you're able to join. Just chime in whenever you've got audio, and we will circle back to you with some of the questions that we're going to move on from now. And this one actually is one where I'm hoping that you can weigh in, but others weigh in as well. You have audio on your end. Unfortunately, we can't hear you. Janine, are you able to unmute, or is there some, Carlton, can you give a hand? Say something.
We can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. We can't hear you. If you're able to get that fixed, I'm hoping you'll chime in on this next question. This is sort of falling within your field. And I want to, what we're doing right now is trying to flesh out the various things that fall within the framework of what is a democracy, things that democracies are supposed to do. And then really interrogate whether those things are our experience as Black people. So in addition to one person, one vote, being able to hold people accountable by being able to vote them out of office, protection of fundamental constitutional rights and freedoms, there's also the rule of law. Democracy ensures that laws are applied equally and fairly to all citizens. Now, what's interesting about this is democracy in its earliest interpretation was always meant to apply to citizens. And as I mentioned earlier, what we've seen with our country is a modification of our Constitution and even our social norms to expand on what it means to be a citizen, who's a citizen. There was a time that even though we said, we the people, all people are created equal, we actually had to have constitutional amendments to say, oh yeah, we mean Black people. And oh yeah, we mean women too. And that's because the social norms were completely against those things. And we never did, nowhere do we see that playing out. And this has been mentioned, and Brother Shabazz touched on this, in how the rule of law is applied. We see there's more of us who are exposed to criminal legal system, more of us are exploited within a legal system, criminal legal system, and you see more of us incarcerated and disenfranchised. And to me, it still gets back to the ability to have a say in how you are governed. So when you're disenfranchised, you lose that opportunity to have a say. So if I see that, Janine, are you back on? Because I'd love to ask you a question in that regard. All right, Rick, would you please talk some more about that historically? How have what's the linchpin of this issue? And I do want to say, we recognize that race and how our laws have been racialized is the crux of this, but can you talk a little bit more about how that plays against this notion of democracy?
Well, it's interesting. I was thinking back to Aristotle and Plato. Plato was Aristotle's teacher, and of course, Plato wrote a very famous expose, The Republic, and then Aristotle was the first person to sort of classify the different types of rule, including democracy. And democracy he considered a negative form of rule. In fact, neither one of them believed in democracy. They thought it was terrible. They thought it would lead one. Aristotle certainly did look down on it because he felt that everybody had divergent interests, and as long as everyone wasn't equal, so therefore the premise of democracy would be unwound because this notion of equality amongst all was sort of a pie in the sky notion. Plato thought it would lead to tyranny. One of the things I think is interesting now is that I think that while yes, Black folks certainly have been undermined by this notion of democracy, I don't think it's just about us. This is where I think it gets sort of interesting. I think Hispanic folks, I think other groups of folks, of course, Native Americans, a lot of folks, different groups have all been, including women, LGBTQ plus community, there's lots of folks have been undermined by democracy not in theory, but in practice. But what's happened now is like this old adage of divide and conquer, which I always find to be sort of an interesting notion, that when I was growing up here in San Diego back in the 70s, and late 60s, I can tell you that it was a very different world where Black folks and other folks started coming together. There was some very sort of social context of people trying to find a way to work together through some of these things. And it seemed like at that time there was a lot of hope. And I'm a native San Diegan, so I've seen it from beginning to where it is today. And I can tell you that now there's this polarization of groups where no one wants to be on the bottom rung of the ladder. So they've divided us all up. So instead of having a common theme and platform, we have allowed ourselves to be controlled by, a lot of it ties into capitalism and economics, right? Because it's like, for example, I use the notion that if I gave the Black folks $100, but I gave the Hispanic folks $1,000, and I'm the money man, who are they mad at? Are they mad at me? Is they mad at me, or are they mad at each other, right? And the goal is to have them be mad at each other. They don't even realize that I'm the person who made the decision who was getting what, right? And so a lot of times we don't realize that our democracy is dictated. And I think Brother Shabazz kind of mentioned that indirectly, was about the idea of impact. And I know we'll talk about capitalism and economics later, but it's certainly, when you look at our democracy today, it is rooted in a very strong capitalist notion where money is way more important than people in our society.
Right.
And what happens in that context is why you have some, you have elites and all these other groups that normally would be undermined by democracy that have stepped above it because they're not in with the general population of people. And the mythology of how they see themselves is dictated to them through social media and other contexts. That's why it's interesting, a lot of young people of color, especially, and I'll just use Black kids, a lot of younger Black kids don't see themselves through the lens that some of us have lived through the civil rights movement, and the various movements are been maligned or called names or been harassed by the police, because that hasn't been their reality. So their notion of even supporting or voting for things like affirmative action program issues or various things is completely wiped away because they don't see themselves through that lens. And we all know, as we sit here today, that if you don't protect those things, if you don't protect the movements, if you don't protect those aspects, you will lose them. That's why we see the civil rights movement is kind of waned. Talk to it about young kids about it now, they look at you like you're from outer space half the time. So the various movements that were there that allowed for us to be where we are today, to some degree, have been the leaders of those movements are gone. Can you name any of them? The Cesar Chavez's, the Martin Luther Kings, and all the other folks, Gloria Steinem, all those folks who were prevalent have gone by the wayside. And there's no one leading these causes that anybody can point to anymore to say, hey, we need to be able to hold government accountable. There's no one holding government accountable in a collective way.
That's a great transition to bring in Janine Holler. Are you there? Oh dear. Are you with us, Janine? So moving on.
Hello?
Yay, Ray. So let me put a couple of questions at you. They've stacked up a bit for your input. The last thing that Rick Epps said was there's no one to hold people in power accountable. Why is that? And or do you agree with that? And what should be the infrastructure? Isn't it democracy that is supposed to be that infrastructure to enable us to hold lawmakers accountable?
Absolutely. And just confirm, you can hear me, correct?
Yes, yes. we
Okay,
can.
great. Sorry about that. But absolutely, as you had explained, democracy is really by the people. So the mechanism we have is voting. And that right that we have also comes with a responsibility. Responsibility not only just on the voting side of that, but to remain engaged. And when we really look at a lot of our elections and the number, when you look at population as a whole, the number that's deciding the outcome. And I would say many in the political space rely on lack of engagement. So, and I can understand being disengaged, disillusioned, especially now in this climate. I've been heavily involved in a lot of, political campaigns in Michigan, more so here, but now I've chosen California as my home, more engaged here. And if you really study the outcome of these elections, and a very small portion of our population, whether it's at the federal level, state level, local level, has even determined. But yet those individuals that are representing us, because we are a republic, um, they don't always represent what we want, what's important to our lived experience. And so with that, I would say we hold the right that we have. And I agree with what Professor Rick said about where we've come from. The younger people not necessarily appreciating a lot of the struggle. But I would also add that as I was growing up, my dad took me to the polls, but educated me, and not just for the presidential election, for all of them, the school boards, because they all have an impact on our lived experience. Also, I appreciate that there was a time in the Black community where barbershops were the place where you got a lot of informations, and beauty shops and community events, and in the church. That's where we got our information. And we as a people, we've moved away from that in so many ways. That's why I really appreciate and thank you for the opportunity to speak here. Um, because I do feel, and not just for Black people, you asked me that question before, is it just unique to Black people? I say, no, democracy will hurt us all. But yes, Black people are positioned in a way where by force, the rights we do have, it wasn't because someone woke up and said we're going to treat them as equals, as our Constitution speaks to. And what drove that? It was those in the civil rights movement, those that came before that movement and joining together. And we all know the civil rights movement was brought forth by people of all different backgrounds and all different races, saying, no, we want something better for ourselves, for our children, for our grandchildren. So yes, the vote is there for us, but our engagement is the responsibility that we have so that our vote can matter. And even when you're disillusioned with the outcome, it's that vote again that can change. We know other groups of individuals, even when you look at the LGBTQ community, and in a very short period of time, how their voices are heard. We've been struggling, some can argue, for decades, hundreds of years longer, but their advancement is so much more profound. So it shows us what we can do, even those of us that have not lived through the civil rights movement at its early state, coming together, unified, and fighting for those rights that, yes, should have been given to us as the Constitution was established, but have not in all respects. But if we don't stand up now, yes, the Black people, because of our beginnings here, will be detrimental. It will be detrimental. But there are all other groups as well. Women, for example, you mentioned that, the voting rights, and we see that now play out day in and day out. And I don't want to get out of turn, but I want to be respectful of the time because we can always see we can do better. Brother Shabazz talked about it not being a perfect situation. I agree with him. It's never been. But all we have available today is our vote. And if we do not engage, that will be lost too. It will be lost. And then where will we be? We need to not become complacent with the progress we made. It's that unity that decide. And I encourage, take your grandchildren, take your children, community individuals. My mother, not really involved. The Obama election in 2008 was her first one, but she became the go-to. And with me being involved, I became her go-to. I say educate, not looking at the news and media, researching these things. And I know it's overwhelming. I know, but there's a lot of misinformation out there. So value that right that you have and pursue the fulfilling that right through carrying out your responsibilities to remain engaged and engage and encourage others. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And you got a lot in there for you. Yeah, it was a nice time away. We got some good stuff from you. Thank you so much. Brother Shabazz, I want to bring you back into this because it occurs to me that perhaps a yes, no, or none of your business question that we could have on the table is, will you be voting in the next election? So we'll start with you. Will you be voting in the next election?
I haven't voted for probably 25 years.
So is that
Yeah,
the reason?
I stopped voting after I got out of the Marine Corps because I figured out in the Marine Corps that the problem is us, the United States government. And as such, I couldn't participate in a system that requires not only our destruction, but goes around the planet, deposing democracies, right? Dr. King talks about 1968.
I'm gonna cut you short because you said no. I will tell you that's a struggle for me. Don't go off camera. I want to see your face. Anybody else want to come in here and tell me no, that they don't vote or they won't be voting, and tell us why? Yeah, silence. You're alone. That's brave. You're a brave man. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Tell us how society has changed by you not voting. How do we get to that new place that you envision where we are treated with dignity, respect, as equal citizens in this country?
We're not going to get to that new place in this system. I've taught in 4 prisons, 3 in Illinois, and I've taught here at Donovan. And most of my students look like me, and that's not by accident. It's because the system, the rule of law, has been weaponized since 1776 to criminalize Black men especially. So it's literally baked into the system. So we can't do that. We can get some modicum of relief, right? The Democrats make us feel kind of better about our oppression, but it's not freedom. If we're going to be free,
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, if we're going to be free, we're going to have to do what we did. We celebrated every 4th of July. People are afraid to hear. We're going to have a revolution.
However,
change the
while I don't disagree, I do want to bring in some other voices what I'm not disagreeing with is the fact that this is something that's affected us uniquely since the inception of this country. But I do want to.
Could I add one more point?
Yeah, one more.
Real quick. So Black Americans voted higher rates than any other demographic besides white folks. So Asians, Latinos, we voted a higher rate, yet we're below them in terms of most quality of life indicators. Latinos are sometimes neck and neck, but for the most part, we're below Asians and Latinos, even though we vote more than they do.
You're right.
The question is, how do we explain that?
So yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that. I want to give it a different context. Let's go back to this notion of democracy, and Professor Rick will bring you in. So another core tenet of democracy is the ability to respond and adapt to the needs of the people. And what Brother Shabazz is saying is a view that's held by many, 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 many Black people. How do you respond? Why is democracy worth defending, and how will that get us to this place where we are treated with dignity and the respect that we deserve as citizens?
Well, it's like Winston Churchill said, about democracy is like the best of the worst, right? And except for all the others. And because the essence of it is the participation of the people, which is on a certain level very idealistic, because from the beginning inception of our country, the Constitution was written and founded and protected by elites for elites. I always made quip about, 4th of July. I said, why do folks celebrate it? Because only people that were free were rich white folks. It were rich white men. It wasn't even poor white folks were part of the equation in terms of who was free on July 4th. Because on July 5th, you had to go back to work. And so it's interesting how when we talk about today and framework, one of the things, one of my biggest criticisms as an educator is the fact that I think we allow our history to be ascribed to us, and we have written out of history Black folks, brown folks, all the other folks, women. Just like I use the example of the movie Hidden Figures, and I said this wonderful movie about what these women did who happened to be Black, 50, 60 years ago. And I remember when I showed it in my class, and the students were like, wow. And I was like, wow, isn't that amazing? And they're like, yeah. I said, but here's the question. Why the hell are we just seeing it 60 years later? Because good and darn well, NASA wouldn't have changed the name of that building down in Texas if it hadn't been for that movie, right? They would have Katherine Johnson's name would have been left out of history if that movie hadn't come forward. Then they have the wake up moment for a moment and go, oh, okay, we better tick the box because we don't want to piss off too many people. But it's the struggle here is that, when we talk about from the Black experience, it's about recognizing that you're right. It's important that we vote. It's important that we show up, because if we don't, then we allow them, we lose if we don't show up. And yes, it may be a slow process. Maybe we are behind Hispanic folks because Hispanic population in our country is growing exponentially. So part of that is because sheer number. We might vote in greater blocks, but there's more of them. And so therefore, you're going to have a situation that creates this environment. The other part of that is complex is that looking at, when we talk about this idea of democracy, when we talk about it from one portion, we look at it through the lens of the Democrats, right? We look at it through this more liberal ideology. And, I had this aha moment this last year of, everybody who's liberal ain't down for being liberal in every way. There's a whole lot of liberals that are liberal about climate change and women's right to choose, for example, and all that kind of stuff. But they don't want you dating their daughters or dating their sons, right? So we have this misguided notion that all liberals have the same interest, and they don't. And so you can have a whole lot of folks that look like you that ain't, or may be on the same umbrella of those folks in struggle who don't have the same interest as you are. So therefore, the split becomes more damning. And again, that whole what I mentioned about divide and conquer becomes so much more prevalent, which undermines the essence of us collectively working together to hold government accountable. Because in a democracy like ours, we, the people, are supposed to tell it, this is what we need. They're supposed to respond by providing laws and policies to address the needs of the people. And what we've seen is that has been completely wiped away by corporate interest, by private wealthy individuals like Peter Thiel, who was, J.D. Vance's boy, puppet master.
That's new? But do you think that's new?
No, it's not new, but never have we seen. But yeah, now it's public. And what's happened behind the scenes, people don't even have any idea. These people who are behind the scenes, who are trying to drive the narrative of our country to serve their personal interest or their personal view, not the collective view of what our country has become. And people are very afraid of the fact that the country is no longer a majority white country, and it's going to grow further that way. And people are very afraid of that, who have historically been at the forefront. So they have to try to write laws and policies to undermine those groups so that they can protect even if they are the minority in terms of number, but they are trying to protect in some way in this future sense their leadership and ability to control, even though they are. Absolutely.
Let me bring in Dennis and ask this question, and taking what Brother Shabazz said. If the Black vote doesn't matter, why suppress it?
Well, the premise is what I have a problem with, because I fundamentally believe that the Black vote does matter. And one of the reasons that I say that is that even in communities across the country where the population might not be a high percentage of that voting district, we could be a swing vote. We could be the vote that tips the balance of scales and turns a victory into one candidate, that because we believe either he or she is the lesser of two evils, or that the better way, we get advanced concessions from a candidate in return for our support. So I think the fact that we can be the swing vote is very, very important in communities where we are the majority. I see the significance of the Black vote, for example, in these cities that have Black mayors. Presumably, almost all of those Black mayors, although I can think of some exceptions, almost all of the Black mayors are going to be responsive to the needs of the constituent as expressed by the constituents. I think that case is important to understand that the Black vote is very significant. And there were these two contested elections for United States Senate in Georgia. And we got Senator Raphael Warnock in, and another senatorial candidate, a Democrat, was also elected in. That tipped the balance in the U.S. Senate in favor of the Democrats. Otherwise, the Republicans would have controlled both the House and the Senate, and we would have had a lot of disastrous legislation, or at worst, inattention to our needs as voting citizens. I think that it's understandable for people to be frustrated and to say that I really don't care. For example, when President Biden, before he withdrew from the race, was pitted up against Donald Trump, I know many people that were dissatisfied with both choices, and I understand the reasons for that dissatisfaction and that frustration. At the National Bar Association convention, which I recently attended in Las Vegas, a young attorney got up and he said, I don't like, this is before Biden had withdrawn. He got up and he said, I don't like either Biden or Trump, so I'm going to vote for Kanye. And one of the older Black attorneys in the audience where this was discussed took the time to tell him that even though we don't have the best possible choice at this particular time, we have to do as much as we can to make sure that we do not elect the other person who's the fascist and who has a totalitarian approach to politics and who never has had our interests as Black people in mind. He's certainly done many, many things from his days as a housing provider to discriminate against Black people. He's done things like call for capital punishment of those young men in Central Park who were entirely innocent and later on exonerated. There are tough choices in politics. And sometimes, yes, we do have to choose the lesser of two evils. But now we clearly have a good presidential candidate in Kamala Harris running for the office. And I think we have every reason to believe, based on her record, that she would be tuned into our needs as Black people. I met her in 2010 after she had just got elected as Attorney General of California. And she told me that when she was the district attorney of San Francisco, that she had a recidivism rate reduced by 7% of the inmates who had been convicted of crimes. There was a 70% reduction in them being re-arrested and reconvicted and resentenced to prison after they had been released. And I asked her, how did she do that? And she told me because she, while they were incarcerated, encouraged and set up programs for them to obtain marketable skills and training that would allow them to be productive individuals once they were released.
Thank you.
And that was a condition of their parole, that they perform these jobs. And as a result, 70% of them didn't go back to prison. And
okay,
so
thank you. We're gonna put a pin in that, because even though we're C4, I really don't want us to do any electioneering around any particular candidate. At this time, we're still trying to unpack. And one of the other things I want to come to is the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court's role in a democracy, and talk a bit about how we see this court. From my perspective, and I'm just going to throw it out there, and there are two cases that I found particularly interesting and undemocratic. And one is the case Alexander versus South Carolina NAACP. And this was a ruling that where the NAACP sued to prevent gerrymandering, where we were seeing Black people who were dispersed across more than one congressional district, packed into one to dilute their power in other parts of the state. And the other issue, and the one that's getting a lot of press, is US versus Trump. And this is the Supreme Court ruling that said that former President Trump would be immune from criminal prosecution for acts he allegedly committed while in office. And I will point out that part of that immunity would mean that he or any president, future president, would have the power to pardon someone who commits a crime on their behalf. And why don't we start with Janine? And let's talk about law. And what is the responsibility in a democracy for there to be free and equal protection of law? I hear you now a little bit. Uh-oh. Well, why don't we have, while we work on that, why don't we have Rick, if you'd come in, what's the responsibility of democracy, and what expectations should we have for free and fair protection, equal protection of law?
Well, if the Supreme Court, which I would say unfortunately is a rather, and I know there's some good folks in the Supreme Court on a particular side, but
These three.
I think that, yeah, I think one of the greatest failures and threats to our democracy today is the Supreme Court. Many people don't realize that, just for background's sake, that in order for the Supreme Court only hears 3% of the cases that are sent to it. You have to file a writ of certiorari, and then it goes up for review, and they can basically hand select whichever cases they want to actually just what they want to decide on. That's why things like Roe versus Wade and things, you go, well, why did they pick that? It was historic law. Normally, when there are historic laws on the books, like 50 plus years of Roe versus Wade, they don't usually mess with that. That's usually like, okay, that's cut in stone. We're not bothering that. So why do these things happen? And this is where the struggle is, that the Supreme Court is very politicized. And one of the failings, I would argue, from the beginning of our democracy is that they allow for the president to nominate the justices. I think that's one of the worst things. It's one of the only places that you see where that inherently makes it a political thing, because most presidents, wherever side they line up on, are going to try and put justices in that think the way they think or line up on their political side. And so I think that really undermines the court completely. But now we found such complicity in this court is frightening. I mean, there have been racists on the courts, there have been all kinds of folks that have said at the highest level. I'm not a big fan of the court. I don't like lifetime terms for anybody. I think that's a scary place for anybody to be. But I will tell you that I think that their job is to protect. They're the last bastion of protection and interpretation of the Constitution as it applies to the laws that are coming through from Congress. We know Congress has abandoned, a lot of folks in Congress have abandoned the Constitution too. A lot of people don't realize those folks in Congress, they swear an oath to the Constitution, not to a political party. And they have not all, but a good number of them don't even believe in what they supposedly stand for. And I think now we see a court where we have a gentleman take the word gentleman back. We have Clarence Thomas sitting up there who's admitted to taking gifts, and still, and people look at him and say, well, we have this Black man on the court. Well, wait a minute. There's everybody who looks like us ain't always about us, right? And see, we have this misguided number. Well, look, we got this Black. He's Black. We checked the box. No, wait a minute. That's like Ward Connolly, who was here in California, right? Doing away with Prop 209. And so the idea was that, the responsibility is there, but there's no accountability by this court. No one can hold the court accountable for their actions. And that's one of the most frightening indictments, because they're dictating policy, which was never supposed to be the role of the court.
So
Very
have they
much.
forgotten what a democracy stands for? I mean, how have we, I mean, have we slipped, or was this always going to be the eventual trajectory? You know, you said you don't like lifetime appointments. We've discussed various ways in which the court has evolved, but was it
Yeah.
always going to come to this point right where we are now?
I don't think anybody foresaw that it would become as polarized as it has. In fact, I think we were looking at a point of evolution where there was, even though you might have had one more conservative or one more liberal, there was still a very good balance in terms of people providing professionalism and logical process moving forward. And a lot of times the court is swayed by their decisions by looking at what's happening in society. You can bring pressure to the court decisions by virtue of letting the people bring pressure publicly. That's why the Roe versus Wade, I'm using Roe versus Wade as an example. They quite, do you notice how subtly it came in? Like it literally popped in out of nowhere, and then it was voted on and it was done.
No, it was
There was
it was the leak first to
it was the leak.
prime the pump. Yeah.
Exactly. But it happened so quickly and it's ironic with social media and all the avenues of flash, bang, boom, everybody, it was nowhere. And then all of a sudden it was taken from us. And now all these states are now going back trying to put their own laws back in place. But here's the thing that's most damning about this. One of the key aspects of our Constitution is the Supremacy Clause, which says that the federal Constitution and the federal law supersedes all state constitutions and state laws. And yet, rarely does the federal government exercise that right to hold the states accountable. That's why we had a civil war, because when they try to secede, federal government says, no, Supremacy Clause of the Constitution says you cannot secede from the country. It's a union. We hold together, and that's what's supposed to do that. But they never look when it came to.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. Because our economy matters more than our.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Janine, are you live now? Are you on? Can you talk a little bit? No. I know it's good, whatever you're about to say.
I know. I want to hear what she has to say.
Let's bring in Brother Shabazz. We keep working on this. And I'm going to ask you a question, sir, since we're getting at now other parts of our system of governance that are affected by voting, and that is it's the President of the United States who nominates Supreme Court justices, and it's the Senate who thumbs up or thumbs down. All those things are those people are put in place by voting. So can you expand a little bit more on your stance and how you see the systems that currently exist? How do you see those systems changing?
Yeah, to clarify, I just wanted to make clear that I'm not disappointed with the system or even angry per se with it. I have an analysis. I'm a Black nationalist. Black nationalism is a political philosophy. It's one of the oldest Black political philosophy. If you read Michael Dawson, he's a retired political scientist at I think it's at Harvard. He wrote a book called Black Vision. He talks about how Black nationalism is one of the oldest Black ideologies in the United States. So we have an analysis, and our analysis is that this system is fundamentally racist. It's like it's baked into that thing, and so you can't change it from within. That's our argument. And so, for example, Malcolm X talked about, we have this whole thing wrong. We think we're doing civil rights, but you can't get civil rights within a system controlled by white people. The court, all the branches of government are controlled by white people. And the aim of those white people is to maintain power and to subjugate Black people. You can't change that system within. You have to crush that system before and it's crushing us now. That's what I'm telling you. It's not working. It doesn't matter doesn't matter which judge is there. Black people stay at the bottom, period. I'm from the hood in Inglewood. That's my perspective. Now, if you're middle class, you might say, well, you might have your nice car, your nice home somewhere, and you're comfortable. But for most Black folks, we are not comfortable. We're catching hell. We've always caught hell in this system. So you can't change it.
I don't disagree, but I don't want us to get away from the question. And
I'm asking your question. You asked a question about the judges that you have to vote.
No, my question was.
Go ahead.
Specifically, and if this is your answer, that's cool. My question specifically was, if this is a system that we have, And we're talking about the Supreme Court, but we can talk more broadly. But if this is a system that we have and
Hello?
Supreme Court, yeah, there you are. We'll get to hold. Don't stop what you're doing. Do it. Keep that mic live. But let me get this question out, and then we'll come to you right after Brother Shabazz response to this, gives a brief response to this. If the system that we have, where jurists are nominated by a president who is elected, and approved by or not approved by a Senate that is elected, how do you change laws to provide better protection if you're not participating by voting on who's to represent you in selecting those jurists?
Well, I think it's another misconception. So you can participate, you can be politically active without voting. For example, my first action against police was in 1998 when those police officers, so-called, killed that young girl, Taisha Miller, in Riverside, California. And we mobilized against the police to challenge that, right? But I'm saying that this system does not work for Black people because it's not designed to work for Black people. We have to radically change the system. You can't do that from within. So that's my answer.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Appreciate it. I still appreciate your bravery. Keep it up. So, Janine, please respond.
Yes. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, very much.
Great. Thank you so very much. Going back to the Supreme Court, it really kind of furthers what I was speaking to earlier. Elections have consequences. They just do. And if you value the rights, as we talk about democracy, even though it's not a perfect system, but the progress that's been made for many, and especially Black people, if you would like for things to move forward in the advancement direction, the only tool we have today is our vote. There's no other option. It's our vote. And like I said, when you look at history, when we have united, change has come. When we have united, we've gotten to the polls, but beyond that, it's not just the presidential election. As I mentioned, the school board all the way up, the political structure of this government impacts our lives. And not just today, not just tomorrow, which will impact our children, but forevermore. So it is my hope that we remain engaged and work together to perfect it, acknowledging that it's not perfected at this point. But if we don't use what we have fought, lost lives to get, then what do we do? What is our hope for a better tomorrow? The Supreme Court is the result of the election. Elections have consequences.
And actually, the current makeup is a result of the majority leader refusing to allow Obama to appoint or to name a nominee. And
exactly,
he used his power to hold that until there was a change in party. And his successor was successful in naming 3.
Correct. So sometimes it's hard to see. I can appreciate that. And as I speak with individuals, as I have, it's first looking at what's important to you and today, and then understanding which area of government directly impacts those things that are important to you. It's us educating ourselves and educating one another about our structure as it is, as imperfect as it is. This is what we have. I don't know, and I'd be interested to hear, are there any other tools that can effectuate the change that we desire, acknowledging that, yes, African Americans are positioned differently, but as I stated, I believe when the threat that we're facing now to democracy, it hurts us all. And our history is there for a reason, but I also try to move the discussion as much as I can with individuals in my space to don't feel powerless. Don't allow all the misinformation and the exhaustion, which I believe a lot of that's put out there intentionally to serve as a distraction for us to feel powerless, hopeless. And if you fall prey to that, I'd say, God bless you. God bless you. It is appreciation that my dad, a man that came from the South and endured a lot in his life as a Black man, that utilized what he had been taught to be the tool that was given to him. Now, it didn't create a perfect situation for him, even though he had the right. But every time he took me to the poll as a very little girl, he explained a lot of the history and the struggle to get to be able to walk through those doors. When he became an older man, he refused to mail in his ballot. He's like, no, I'm going to cast it in person because it meant something to him. But at the same time, he feared quite often for his children, especially his only son. And so until we find something better, let's work towards using what we have and at the same time work together to perfecting it, creating the better. We may never walk through the door with it like many of the folks that came before us, but we can really put in the time and energy. This reminds me of the whole movement with affirmative action across this country. Little by little, those rights considerations, as Attorney Dennis had explained, just in the employment space. And you didn't really hear a lot about that until it's gone. And now you see the results of it. We see those challenges and they're chipped away little by little by little. Until I close with, until we have something better, let's work together and use the tool that we have, because the elections have consequences. As our moderator has said, the impact goes far beyond that one position. And educate and encourage others to educate one another and remove this plague of misinformation that is only put out there to discourage us.
Thank you. Great opportunity to transition to one of those very threatening specters about what could happen, what is actually has been proposed in 922 pages, which is this Project 2025. And we're going to spend about 20 minutes unpacking that. The thing that I got stuck on, I didn't get past, was how it changes voting rights and protections for voting rights. But just to level set what Project 2025 is, it was created, it's called a manifesto, conservative manifesto. It was created by the Heritage Foundation, which is a very well-known conservative think tank. And it's called Project 25. Its real name is the 2025 Presidential Transition Project. It is contemplating a Trump victory, but doesn't necessarily have to be Trump, although a number of the people who participated in crafting it were members of his administration, notorious members of his administration. And the goal of this manifesto is, and I'm quoting, building a governing agenda, not just for next January, but long into the future. And that's something that's important to appreciate, is the planning that goes behind these types of manifesto, if you will. And it's not the only one that's ever been crafted. It's not a partisan exercise. Democrats have done similar things, just not as well, in terms of having cobbled all these things together and having them connect to each other to drive a particular agenda. It's Project 2025 is composed of 4 distinct pillars. The first is that it's a policy guide for the next conservative presidential administration. It has a database that's sort of LinkedIn style, that of people that they are actually going out and recruiting and vetting who could potentially serve in a Trump administration, meaning that they are identifying who they are aligned, who's ideologically aligned with this agenda. And then they have training. It's known as a Presidential Administrative Academy. So these people that they are reaching out to don't necessarily have to have a role in government. In fact, it's preferred that they have as little knowledge of governance as possible, because another part of their agenda is sweeping out people, civil servants, people who do have an understanding of governance, and I would say one that is not partisan. As a civil servant, you're doing the job because it's an important job that the country needs. But it's sweeping out people creating a database of people who could serve in this longer arch of governance, conservative governance, and it's training them how to do it. And then there's a playbook of things that this new conservative administration would do in the first 6 months. So it's, again, 922 pages, well thought out, and the President 45, Trump, presidential candidate Trump, has disavowed that he knows anything about this document. And in fact, he is not saying anything about the people who were in his administration who are now authors of it. And one of the points that was made in a talk show that I was watching was that even though he may be distancing himself, the entity and the person who crafted this has resigned from his position. The document itself and the plans aren't going anywhere. There was time spent in this. There are people who I've identified with this. They've done a lot of the groundwork for this. It's not going anywhere. But one thing that I wanted to get on, and then I'd like the panelists to expand on other areas of concern. And Dennis, we'll be going to you first because I know you spent quite a bit of time studying this. But one specific way that I see how Project 2025 threatens our form of government, our democratic form of government, is that it dismantles protections for voting rights. And if democracy, if at its core is about one person, one vote, if you dismantle those protections, you are in fact dismantling democracy. So what it does, what it says that Department of Justice litigation strategy has to be totally aligned with the president's agenda. And this Project 2025 would eliminate the Civil Rights Division within the Department of Justice. And that's the division that is responsible for enforcing civil protections, civil provisions of federal law that protect the right to vote. That includes the Voting Rights Act and the National Voter Registration Act. The other thing, and again, everyone's gonna have a chance to comment, and I'm gonna try to keep your comments short and segments so everybody can come in and talk about different parts. The other thing I wanna raise that I would love some comment on is that one of the reforms is a reform to the Federal Elections Commission. And that reform would be to take the cap off of what candidates can raise, which means more money into the system that you can get from wherever you want. And of course, you're going to be influenced by those people who put that money in. So to Dennis, let's talk Project 2025. Name your top 5 concerns.
Well, I think I previously said my first concern was the elimination of the ability of employment discrimination plaintiffs to prove their case via disparate impact theory. That is one of the concerns that I have Prop 25 because it is a basic civil right protection that would no longer exist. I'm also concerned with the fact that part of it would eliminate the free school lunch program. And I say that is because I know many of our kids who depend on the free lunch program at school for nourishment. And if that's eliminated, we have a health concern. Speaking of health concerns, it would eliminate the Affordable Care Act. And that's only because President Obama's legacy is the Affordable Care Act. I think it affects us again disproportionately because prior to the enactment of the Affordable Care Act, many of us did not have adequate health insurance. And this opened up the opportunity to obtain the health insurance. Would raise prescription drug prices. Many of our seniors are unfortunately dependent on numerous prescription drugs. And if the doctor has prescribed to them that they take it, but the cost of it is out of reach, again, we have that health concern. Social Security. Many of our seniors in our communities depend on Social Security, and it's not anything other than a right because they paid into the program. Raise the retirement age. I think people have a right to engage in planning and set a limit as to how long they're going to work. And this was tried, I know, in France, and it was very, very unpopular. It would be just as unpopular here because at some point, either your health or your age or other factors basically prompt you to retire. And those are just some of my concerns. I have about 20 other concerns, but I don't want to take up too much of your time.
Wow. Okay. Well, that was 6. Anyone else want to comment on those or add to those? Because actually, I would like to come back and hear some more, Dennis, but let's have everyone else. Rick, did you want to comment on any of the concerns that were raised by Dennis or add to the list?
Well, I certainly echo what Dennis said, definitely. But I also have, there's a lot of other things to be concerned about. You know, I mentioned earlier about, you know, how the system is built to sort of undermine all of us. And so the erosion of, by trying to make America white again, it's, you know, let's just put the elephant in the room out there. And I talked about how even though the country is going to become a minority country, if you will, this is the way that white America could still keep itself in a leadership role, is by drafting and instituting policies that undermine people of color, Black folks and other groups, but also particularly let's talk about Black folks, by unraveling all these social policies. They're also eradicating civil society, and the very essence of democracy is civil society. So I'm very concerned about just the premise behind this, because again, democracy is supposedly for all the people. And so when these people start trying to draft policies that are going to benefit us one segment, you're basically moving away from what the popular people, what the majority of people really want. You're setting policies that dictate for the entire country that serve a narrow interest, but for a narrow group of people, right? So one of my other concerns is, you know, again, the issues with abortion, the issues with creating a religious theocracy in our country, that sets a framework up where it undermines women's rights, it undermines the rights of people of color. It's going to, you know, and what I call, you know, one of the things that people don't really understand about politics is that a lot of legislation that comes through, or is what I call tip of the iceberg legislation. So they dangle something out there to see what kind of pushback they get, right? If they're going to get any pushback. And then one little law, one little policy that gets instituted that moves forward is the tip of the iceberg of a broader spectrum of things that then come down behind it. It's like the Titanic sees the iceberg in the water, but doesn't see that, but underneath the water is 3 miles wide, right? So they don't realize that they're in danger because they just see the small little iceberg on top and not what's below. And I think people sort of are naive regarding this fact that when they don't realize what they're about to lose. And unfortunately, the way we're wired in our society is we're very reactionary. So instead of putting the oil in the engine before the engine blows up, a lot of times we wind up in the scenario where the engine blows up, then we have to go and try to repair it after it's blown up. So that's what I'm really afraid of, is that people are going to, I'm glad that people are clanging the bell about Project 2025, but I wonder, and I'm concerned about whether a lot of the people on the other side of the aisle really understand the implications of what they are proposing. And the lies that Donald Trump is told to suggest that he knows nothing about it are blatant lies. I'm gonna throw it out there just like that, because that's what it is. He lies about everything. This is just another lie that he's suggested, that he knows nothing about this. This is all from the people who served him. There is no way in hell that he doesn't know about this. So, okay, I'm gonna shut up because I start getting, this upsets me to no end. So,
Yeah. Brother Shabazz, Janine, do you want to either expand on what was said or add more? Your own other concerns?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yes, the major concerns as the question was presented, the top 5, I think they were addressed and what was shared so far, but really going back to this discussion of democracy and its threat. All, simply put, it will change our lived experience. And I'm not at all convinced for the better for anyone, but especially for Black people. In that space of civil rights, the progress that has been made will be rolled back. It impacts the things that Attorney Dennis mentioned with respect to access to things that benefits the Black community most. But also when you look at education, that has helped us a great deal. Those that have been able to gain access to the educational system in this country, large in part through civil rights laws, and then advancements in more recent years, that when our students are within those higher education spaces, there are rights afforded to them. Title IX being one major area, but there's several. Funding for school, financial aid and things of the sort that have done great things for the Black community and our advancement, and being able to respond to what we know to be a lot of the imperfect aspect of our Constitution and our lived experience. So it gives us more to then collect, to educate ourselves, to move forward. As we are situated here today, all of us, we were announced in speaking of our credentials, our accomplishments, educational and professional. A lot of those, at least I'll speak for myself, were made possible because there were laws in place that came before I ever was born to allow me to pursue these things and be able to support the issues that were near and dear, not only to me, but to my community. So those things are being threatened. That's a real threat. And before this ever is, the results of the next election, we're seeing it. We're seeing the challenges under the Biden administration. There was some recent changes in Title IX, and there have been a litany of lawsuits brought forward to prevent those things. Not too different than a lot of the challenges that were brought within that same piece of law under the Obama administration. And I'm not partisan in this. I'm just saying there's something in our democracy being threatened, which I believe it is, that will impact all of us. And it's not positioned out in a way that I have any hope about it being an improvement. My mother is in her 80s, in her mid 80s, and she said she did experience a time where there was hope and really felt like we were moving in the right direction. Her prayer now rests with, she no longer, as a woman of faith, she no longer feels that that is the case. And she's concerned most for her children and her grandchildren and great children that she probably will never live long enough to see. So that urgency, that heaviness that rests with my mom, but not only her, several of our people that have gone before us and fought good fights. I say I have to do what I can do, even if it's no more than sitting in these spaces and educating people. Because as Professor Rick had said, I think it will be years to really understand and appreciate the trickling down effect of these rights, these laws, as imperfect as they are. When they're undone, they're undone. And the progress and the hard work and the lives lost to even get them passed would have been lost in vain.
Thank you. I don't know if you're aware, you alluded to it, but one of the things that Project 2025 threatens, in fact, is to eliminate the Department of Education. So it's not just eliminating these various statutes that undergird the educational system, but the oversight of our educational system as a nation would be gone.
Yeah.
Brother Shabazz, any comments on what's preceded you or any other thoughts you have about 2025 you'd like to share?
Yeah, now as an educator, I obviously find it disconcerting, this plan to, the Project 2025's plan to do away with the Department of Education and an important role they have in education. That's obviously disconcerting. They also want to crush, the public school system. And it's not clear about how they would do it, but some sort of, I guess it would be some sort of, an elaboration of the extension of the voucher program or scholarships where you can pick and choose your school and in that way undermine the public system where why can't we have free quality education for everybody, right? Which would be the obvious alternative to that. But conservatives have a big issue with public schools. Now I'm not so concerned with that though. So everybody, I'm not surprised that conservative folks have an agenda. My question is, where is the Black agenda? Now, one answer to that is that, Black folks have had agendas. There's a 2020 agenda, for example. We gave Barack Obama an agenda. Barack Obama told us that he's not the president of Black people, he's the president of Americans, right? So he rejected the Black agenda. And someone said that I want to stress.
You're getting some disagreement.
Yeah, I want to
Hold
stress
on,
here,
Rick.
I don't feel powerless. I'm a child of the Black Power movement. The problem is that Democrats and Republicans conspire to crush the Black Power movement. We don't understand our condition, is what Malcolm X said, and I agree with him. Black radicals say that we believe we're in a struggle for civil. We're actually at war. The Democrats and Republicans are enemies of Black people. And we haven't approached this as a war because we don't understand that we're at war and a life of just struggle and we're at war. We don't have the right strategy, right? We don't have a war strategy. We don't have a war mentality. The Black Panther Party had a war mentality. What's the cast who went underground? The Black Guerrilla family had a war mentality. We don't have a war mentality. We're trying to integrate within a system that is designed to crush us.
Tell us.
I'll leave it there.
Well, no, I got a question. And then I know, Rick, you wanted to weigh in. So how do you, and this kind of touches on something that Janine raised, how do you see the Black agenda being carried in the short term? And what to you is
Saturday?
and if somebody needs to mute.
I don't got no pass meeting.
I think that's you, Ken.
Want to go out there and try to
Ken.
see Andrea. Yeah, no, yeah, figure something out. Yeah.
Carlton, would you please mute Ken?
Like sitting around lounging is not going to be acceptable. Even like.
Did you hear the question, brother?
Go out.
Yes.
But
So
I
you
just
talk
want to know
over-
what you're doing. That's all. I'm not complaining about it. It's just because
Should I just go ahead or?
Yes, now you can go ahead. We was.
Okay. Yeah, well, my answer is that another one of our leaders in the Black radical tradition is Kwame Ture. And Kwame Ture, he was very insistent upon us being the capacity or the necessity of a collaboration. So, for example, I don't have a problem with working with Black liberals or even Black conservatives. We have our agenda is to liberate our people. So if there's a group out there who has a Black agenda, I don't have a problem supporting it, even though my politics are different. I don't tell my students don't vote. I'm 60 years old now. My students are, they're kids, and I tell my students, all undergrads, I tell them all the time, you might reach different conclusions than I have. I might have it all wrong, but you have to live your life and reach your own conclusion, do your own struggling to get to where you are, right? This is what I'm at because of my own trajectory as a Black radical. But everybody's not going to see the world that way. I don't have a problem collaborating with other folks. I'm just saying that from my perspective, from the perspective of Black radicals, we're misunderstanding where we are and where we're at. And because of misreading it, we don't have a proper analysis and we don't have the proper solutions.
I hear you. And one of the things that's one of the most powerful elements of a true democracy is protecting your right to have a different opinion and to express it in a safe space. So that's what this is. So Rick, you definitely wanted to say something. Go ahead.
Well, Brother Shabazz, I would totally respect where you're at. And I certainly understand there are aspects within the Black radical movement that are, why they stand where they stand and some of the latent concerns that are part of that movement. I'm going to just take odds with you here regarding President Obama. And I will disagree with you regarding him sort of abandoning Black folks, because I think that's for those who thought that if it's a little naive to suggest that President Obama was going to come in and be able to say, okay, yeah, I'm Black, I'm going to just hook up Black people, and and I'm going to run the country that way. And I think anybody who suggested that or thought that he could run a country with the first ever, and who knows, hopefully not the last, but the first ever African American to be a president of the most powerful country on the planet, with a legislative body that was told to say no to everything that he tried to do. He had, the reality of politics is you've got to walk that line, right? And he knew that in order for him to help Black folks, that he had to help all folks, right? And he tried as much as he could to try to move that bar forward, recognizing that in order for him to make gains in one, he had to help benefit a majority of folks of color, right? Or those who were oppressed. And I think anybody who thinks that he could just do something otherwise is really not being honest about the capabilities of the power of the president. If that man had come out another way and tried to say, with his dashiki and afro on and been like, yeah, we're going to hook up Black folks, anybody who thinks that would have gone over well in the society that we live in is being incredibly naive. There's another way to deal with race politics, right? And one of the things we haven't talked about, and I hope we get a chance to before we end today, is the idea of the economics of it, right? Because as we've seen statistically, as Black folks start to elevate themselves from lower economic classes and move up, they become more conservative, as do Hispanic folks and other folks. And so they start, and you know what happens? People who have forgotten their social consciousness, they've almost abandoned it in a weird way to focus on the money and the individuality. So it's like, I got mine, you better figure out how to get yours. And that's why we're growing up in San Diego. I remember when Southeast, I went to Calvary Baptist and Bethel Baptist Church growing up. I was sung in the choir. I was all up in it back in the day. And I will tell you that the Black community is in San Diego. When you go, well, where is it? Well, it's dissolved for the most part. Where it used to be Black is not Black anymore. Down there in Ocean View, down there on 30th Street and down, that was all Black folks down there. The communities that were there that we grew up around have dissolved. And some of it's because of the success of Black folks economically that have moved out of the neighborhoods. But when you try to point to one area, it's very difficult to do that anymore, just in our own community. So the reality is, once people get up out of those communities that they felt disenfranchised, they sort of abandon the people who were left there, because they don't want to have the institutional memory of the life that their parents or grandparents may have lived, when they were growing up. Yeah. And so on one hand, I understand how the younger generations don't want to think, like when I talk to my son about it, and he just it almost bothers him to hear me talk about those things. It's like I'm from outer space, right? Because well, I didn't grow up in that kind of thing. Well, son, just because you didn't grow up in it doesn't mean you don't need to be aware of it, right? So I'm just suggesting to you that the economic forces are really driving a wedge in this, and what we call our democracy. And certainly as people of color and Black folks start to become affluent, they quickly focus more on the money, and then they do on protecting the social infrastructure of our Black community.
If I could add to one comment.
Absolutely.
Real quick. Yeah, I respectfully disagree with Brother Shabazz's comments with respect to any Black president. I believe that no matter if you're Black, brown, white, whatever you are, once you rise to the level of leading and serving as the president of the United States, you are the president of all people. Setting aside one group for another, that goes against, there again, I think the struggle and what we're talking about with democracy is. Once you're in that position, it's the people's interests that you should be looking towards. So, and it also, I wanted to add, when we talk about voting, the impact that these things have, I've had many conversations with people too that were disappointed with what they felt that President Obama did not do for the Black community. But I also, as I would further in their inquiry and discussion, ask them about, did they support him in that role? Did they continue to vote. We know the numbers dropped off drastically in the midterm election after he was appointed, so 2010. And it's imperative that we not only vote for the presidential elections, but all elections.
And
because
down the ballot.
together, they all matter. Thank
And
you.
down the ballot.
And down the ballot. Yes, all of it has an impact on our lived experience.
Yeah, can I just respond briefly? Now Barack Obama, you know, he went to Harvard. I went to Harvard. He went to Harvard Law School. If you look at his actual record, going back to Harvard Law School, Barack Obama he's always been in the center. He's not going to do anything really that's going to tilt too far to the left, right? And so, and it's not just Obama. Black people have carried the Democratic Party on their backs for 60 years.
More
And
than
we're
that.
still, by
Well, no,
every
6
quality of life
years is not that
indicator, we are rock bottom, and we've always been rock bottom.
So let me ask this, and then because we actually need to go from this to my final question. And Carlton, I hope you can share what I dropped in the chat with the larger audience. So the last question is this, and Brother Shabazz, I think you should go first, even though I have some trepidation of what you might say. But hey, it needs to be said, and this is
Well, I'm gonna say it, don't worry.
I know you will. This is a safe space.
I don't think we need safe spaces. I don't even believe in that.
Well, this is a safe space. Whether or not you believe, you're safe here. So whether or not you believe that. So this is the question, and it's for all of you. And let's keep the answer brief, because I do want to give some time to talk about what was just dropped in the chat. So this is an if then. And if the answer is no, then there's really not much more to add, Brother Shabazz. If democracy matters to Black San Diegans, then what is our responsibility for protecting it? Of course, if it doesn't matter, what is our next responsibility? You'll go first, Brother Shabazz. If democracy matters to Black San Diegans, what is our responsibility for protecting?
Yeah, Black San Diegans, we don't have democracy. And so we're going to have to fight for something different. And what that's going to require us to do is have the courage to break from the Democratic Republican plantation and do something different. Let me just read it as I close here. I'll just read Du Bois.
You have 1 more minute.
This is W.E.B. Du Bois, 1922. May God write us down as asses if ever again we are found putting our trust in either the Republican or the Democratic parties. That's W. Du Bois, 1922.
Thank you.
I'll close with that.
One of my heroes, we were born on the same day, so you stymied me. So let's go to Dennis. You there? If democracy matters to Black San Diegans, what is our responsibility for protecting it? Unmute, please. Dennis, you'll need to unmute, please. We're missing all the good stuff. Dennis, please unmute.
Unmute.
They're saying the audience is unable to see the chat. I don't know what that means. It's in the Q&A.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think you just did.
There we are, here, there. And Brother Shabazz, we'll come back to your question. I didn't understand it. But since we have Dennis live, let's go. What the question is, if democracy matters to Black San Diegans, what is our responsibility for protecting it?
I think we have to, first of all, protect our basic safety. When we have these repeated interactions with members of the police department, we have to give input and file complaints with the Commission on Police Practices in order that an independent investigation can be made with subpoena issuance authority, independent investigators, and independent legal counsel, so that we do not have to rely upon internal affairs reports where the police are basically investigating themselves. Secondly, I think that a guy from Compton that went to school with me at Howard told me something, and it really resonated. And he said, votes don't drive elections in this country. Money does. And I think what we have to do is to form political action committees that can be responsible for raising funds to support candidates and causes which are in our best interest and oppose those candidates and causes which are not in our interest, so that we can help to publicize through financing the cost of publications in support of our political positions.
Thank you. Janine, question,
Yes.
people question? Question is, if democracy matters, Black San Diegans, what is our responsibility to protect it?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, as I've stated, my opinion, democracy definitely matters. And it comes with one just very clear, simple right that we hold today to vote. And then what is our responsibility? As I mentioned before, is not only to exercise that right, to exercise it in an educated, informed way, but to go further and help those, maybe those that don't have the information we have, encourage them to do the same, share the fact-based information, starting with what matters to the individual. Now, there's been several comments today about Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservative. I identify as an independent. And I look to the issues. What is important to me? And what is important to me is not just today. What is important to me is about what I do with that many have fought for me to have, to exercise. So there's many ways in which we can go about this, but education being the one, educating ourselves, educating one another, getting back to just the basics of how we used to receive our information and informing one another and being respectful of this process that as we have done today, and thank you, Ms. Phillips, for this, we can disagree. And through that dialogue, that honest but respectful dialogue, we can make better decisions for ourselves and for our children. And that is where I find that our responsibility lies, is to push away the distraction, focus on what really matters in all of this, and help one another in that process.
Thank you. And Professor Rick? Yes.
Well, first of all, I echo what both Dennis and what Janine just so eloquently just pointed out, and I agree. To me, first, my answer would be vote. I think that's the first thing. But I think it would say vote consciously, vote with knowledge in hand, and part of that is our responsibility. Our responsibility. In fact, I would argue what we need to have at more forums like this. To be able to have and get more. I mean, we had a nice number of people show up today, but we need young folks to be able to hear these messages too, to understand and have sources that they can look to for information, to know their history, to understand why it's important that we protect these institutions, that we protect the civil rights, that we protect affirmative action programs, because a lot of them don't realize the subtlety of which they're being pulled away. To pull away from and push them away from all the disinformation that is so pervasive on social media, providing them maybe one or two platforms that are reliable, that are non-biased, in order reasonably non-biased. Everyone there's always bias, but the reasonably non-biased to be able to address their issues and concerns. And and then there are some young folks within their age group who are also very well who are very much exposed, that they might be able to lean into for some of these things that they look to for information. And I think that's really where we help them. That's the place where we help them, is through the education model, and trying to find a dynamic way to address them in a way that they can understand their role and responsibility, not just for today, but for the next generation who come after them. Because I'm really big about, it's not just about you. I think when people think it's just about them, that's where we fail. When you can connect the dot to your little cousins and relatives and family and your future children, that's where you have to realize that you're investing in the future. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to all the panelists. This is a good place for us to end. We did drop in the chat some information that I actually got from the Secretary of State's website. I will kick it over to Ellen to close us out, and thank you all. Thank you for your interest and your attention, and I will go mute now. Ellen.
Yes, on behalf of BAPAC, the Black American Policy Political Association, we really would like to thank our moderator, Cheryl Alethea Phelps. We would also like to thank our panelists, Attorney Janine McIntyre, Attorney Dennis Dawson, Brother Shabazz, and Professor Rick Epps for being here and being very candid and open and transparent. Debate is healthy for all of us. I want to let you know that all of you, particularly the two professors, you were recommended by individuals that I personally esteem. President Mark Sanchez from Southwestern Community College, where Brother Shabazz is a professor, and Dr. Frank Harris recommended Professor Rick Epps. So thank you for taking the time, and I can't wait to meet you both in person. Dennis, Attorney Dennis has been with us for years and years, and Attorney Janine McIntyre has been a BAPAC member for many years as well. I'm thankful she's decided to make San Diego her home, and we will see and hear more from her as well. Did we talk about, or did you put in the chat, Cheryl, the voting information?
I did.
Okay, great. I wanted Attorney Dennis Dawson to talk about the voting, but we've ran out of time. It's 2:01, but we certainly, as Professor Epps has said, we will certainly continue this conversation, particularly in regards to the voting process, the timeline for getting us to November 5th of 2024, and also the importance of local races. I want to say that we have 5 Black women in San Diego who are running for different offices that we want to support as well. This cycle, a few of them are in some very, very contentious races. We'll be talking with them more, and we also will be convening forums and debates where we hope that Cheryl's calendar will allow her to moderate as well. But I just want to say thank you to all of you. We have several questions in the chat. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to those questions, but we will definitely respond. This will be uploaded on our on our YouTube BAPAC channel. So this recording is live. It will be with us forever. I would encourage everyone listening and on this that you use it as information in order to make informed voting decisions. This is just the beginning, and we will be building our information bank based on our formats, including forums and debates, and also continuing this discussion. And I want to just thank you again. It's 2:03, and I want to let us all go so we can enjoy the rest of the weekend. Thank you very much. Great job, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.